All right. So last week we took a look at the college arms that I believe the Mariners could target in this draft. Today, we're going to take a look. Took a lake. We're not going to take a lake. A lake would be a huge reach at this stage in the draft. We're going to take a look at some prep pitchers who have a chance to go at 55 and at 15. Notice I said that reverse because if I'm being completely honest with you, I would be stunned if the Mariners took a prep arm at this draft with their first pick. Would not be surprised at all if they took one at 55, but it would be really surprising to see a prep pitcher go at 15 for the Seattle Mariners. Just doesn't seem like their modus operandi. And this isn't a good class for one either. This is probably in my years of covering the draft, which I've really done since 2009, this is probably the weakest high school pitching class that I can think of. There's certainly nobody who I would consider with a top 10 pick. And there's going to be very few, I think, that go in the top 15, if any. It's just a really bad year for prep pitching. There's some good guys. There's some quantity, especially in that 40 to 60 group. And the Mariners, I do think, need to target some young pitching. They have not really in the past. I would guess that the Mariners take a prep arm at some point in these first 5 rounds, but no guarantees, I'll tell you that much. But I do think there's some names that make sense. Let's start first off with Caminiti. He is a left-handed pitcher out of Saguaro High School in Arizona. He doesn't turn 18 until August 8th, which I think is part of the appeal. Now, if that last name sounds familiar, he is the nephew of Ken Caminiti. He is not Cam Caminiti. He is not the nephew of himself. That would be really hard to do. I'm sure there's some weird way that you could do it, but nope, not this case. But he is the nephew of Ken Caminiti, who I believe won an MVP. If he didn't win an MVP, he was way up there. Terrific defensive player, hit for a lot of power. A very sad death, but really good player. And his son has a chance to be a pretty good one as well. He's not the prototypical top 15 type of pick, but I think there's a really high floor here. I see 60 grade fastball, can touch 98. I think he could even get it a little bit higher as he gets a little bit stronger. Well above average slider, well above average changeup. I think the change has a chance to be his best pitch. Also throws a nice curveball. And he pretty much throws everything for strikes. 6'2", 195. Not a ton of development left on the arm, but enough to say, hey, I think this could develop into a mid-rotation starter and maybe a smidgen better. Maybe a smidgen better as well. I don't think you're looking at an ace, but, top of the rotation arm is not out of the question. I would want a little more ceiling to take somebody at 15 here, but I don't think it would be a huge reach. I think most drafts most experts have him, that I trust anyway, have him in that 15 to 20 range in terms of prospect ranking. He's committed to LSU. I think you will have to go pretty high to get him. I'll tell you an added benefit of Cam Caminiti. I'll tell you an added benefit of adding someone like him. Take a look at the Mariners' left-handed pitching prospects and name one. There is one that I would rank in my top 35. One. And that's Reed Van Scoter, and he is barely in there. And that's not an insult to him, It's just, they have not attacked left-handed pitching. It's been a really weird thing to see for me as somebody who grew up watching Mariner left-handed pitching be the best for the most part, outside of, of course, Felix and now Castillo and all those guys. But it's weird to see. The Mariners just do not have a lot of left-handed pitching depth in their system. It's not a reason to take a guy, but it's a nice added bonus. And, I don't think this will be the pick, but he is a name who makes sense. There's one other guy I think who does make sense at pick 15. And that other arm is another LSU commit. It's William Schmidt, an 18-year-old, 6'4", 180 pounds. I just forgot what school he went to. Catholic high school in Louisiana, which has produced its share of arms, especially for Louisiana State. But good chance that he is going to be a guy who could be better than some of the arms outside of Aaron Nola. I believe Aaron Nola went there. I'm not predicting William Schmidt to be better than Aaron Nola, but he's a better high school prospect than Nola was. This is a guy who has probably the best curveball, regardless of high school or college in the draft. It just generates a boatload of spin, like that 2,900 to 3,000 RPM type of thing that you're looking for. It's that hammer curveball that we love to see. It's kind of gone out of vogue. It's not as popular as the sweeper anymore, but it's got so much movement that I don't think anyone's going to mess with that pitch. And then on top of that, he's a guy who can throw his fastball into the mid 90s. 6'4", 180 tells me that there is projection left in his arm. So I imagine that will become at least a plus fastball, chance for plus plus. Doesn't use his change a whole heck of a lot because he doesn't have to in high school, but he's shown it in, some of these scouting opportunities. Looks like an average pitch. Command has some work to do. I think the delivery needs to be cleaned up just a smidgen. Not a ton of work to do, but I don't see any reason why he can't throw enough strikes to be a frontline starter. If you were going to ask me of the two who I'd rather the Seattle draft at 15, I would go with Schmidt because he has the higher upside. But this is going to be a bonus baby. This is going to be a guy who gets a big amount of cash to buy out that commitment to LSU. It wouldn't shock me if he's one of those guys who goes like in that 30 to 35 range, actually, because you take somebody that you can't get at 30 or 35 and sign him around slot. And then you take Schmidt and use some of the savings that you would have with your last pick and the fact that you don't have to go over for the first pick. Hopefully some of that made sense, but I could absolutely see him being there. I would imagine he's going to be a very expensive arm. Seattle, I think it would be worth it. They got to add some young talent in the pitching ranks. I don't think they're going to, but I imagine that William Schmidt would be a guy who would absolutely make sense there. If you're doing the 2080 scouting grades, on projection, I think that Cametti's probably a 50 to 55, so average to slightly above average. If you want to go 50 plus, which, yes, is a real grade, you could do that. I think Schmidt could be a 60. There's very few arms in this class who have any chance to be a 60, but I would absolutely make Schmidt one of those guys. All right, let's take a look at some arms who could be available at 55. So an arm that I think probably goes higher than this, assuming, that the bonus, because I don't know anybody's bonus numbers. I'll just tell you that much right now. There was a time where I used to get that stuff thrown around because I don't cover the draft for ESPN or Baseball Prospectus or anybody like that. It's actually kind of a blessing that I don't have to talk to some of these guys, if I'm being completely honest with you. But I do think that this guy is going to be in that vicinity, partially because of bonus things. You'd be looking at the Mariners taking a slot guy and drafting this guy. Why am I not talking about him? His name is Ryan Sloan. He is a 6'5", 220-pound right-hander from York High School in Illinois. Illinois has kind of made they're kind of an up-and-comer in terms of like producing baseball talent. Not the first place sometimes you think of, but they've produced some really good guys. Noah Schultz, obviously, probably the best of those guys, but I believe Blake Walters was from Illinois and got a pretty nice little bonus there as well. At 6'5", 220, there is still some projection left. I don't think that there's a ton, but gets the fastball up to 99 miles per hour, routinely 94 to 97, gets ride in the top of the zone. It's going to be a really tough pitch for hitters to pick up, which makes it a, probably above average pitch in velocity, but closer to a plus pitch when you consider the movement to it. Throws an above average slider. The best pitch here is the change for sure. It comes from the exact same arm speed that you get with the fastball. Then it has that late tumble that you love to see. Could be even a pitch that's effective against right-handers on top of left-handers as well, which can be tough to do. You don't see a lot of right-on-right changes anymore. You see some splinkers and stuff like that, but the actual traditional change, which is what Sloan throws, I think could absolutely be an effective pitch against anybody. Throws everything for strikes. I think the control has a chance to be above average, command as well. No reason to think that he can't develop into at least a mid-rotation arm. Some risk, obviously, with somebody who has that size and throwing that hard this early. We've seen a lot of times that these guys have some sort of injury early on. It's one of the reasons why prep pitching tends to fall a little bit in this draft. but I love the upside here. And if he was still available at 55, and assuming the Mariners went college bat or even prep bat here, I think it would make a lot of sense to target Sloan. For those curious, he is committed to Wake Forest, one of the, talk about up and coming, one of the elite up and coming baseball programs right now. And they've produced a ton of good pitching. But I do believe that Sloan can be a guy who they can sign. And if he's still available at 55, I think he would make a ton of sense. Another arm that I think makes sense, and I have 5 here. I think there, like I said, there are a lot of prep arms that would make sense. There's some others that I won't mention who I think definitely has a chance to do it, just because I don't want this to be a 40-minute video. But Braylon Doughty, a right-hander out of Chaparral High School in California. I never know if I'm saying that right, but that's okay. 6'1", 195 pounds. A guy who's really come on strong since the start of the spring. Very athletic delivery. We love athletic deliveries, and the Mariners certainly do too. You know, they're not like crazy. The guys you see up with Seattle aren't like Marcus Stroman athletic, but certainly have some athleticism in their delivery for sure. Not very big at 6'1", and that's probably going to be the biggest concern, not only in terms of how he can hold up into the modern rigors of pitching, but also, you know, some playing issues maybe with the fastball. But the fact that he is so athletic, really strong kid, according to reports, and can get his fastball up to 98 miles per hour with a ton of life. That's a really nice thing to see. A really quick arm, too. And he throws his fastball for strikes. Curveball, not quite as good as Schmidt's, but just a notch below, and gets that similar RPMs that you love to see. A ton of spin on that pitch. Also throws a more traditional slider. Has some cut-like action to it, but it's an above-average pitch as well. And then also will show a change as well that, you know, needs work, but that's the case for most prep pitchers if we're being completely honest with each other, and we are. There's no reason for us to lie to each other. Throws everything for strikes, athletic, a ton of upside in this type of arm. Doesn't turn 19 until December. Not a fast-track guy. You should never take a high school arm and assume fast-track. It's probably best just not to assume fast-track for any of these guys if we're being honest. Again, look at this honesty that we're building with each other. I like Doughty a lot. Late riser, probably a fairly large bonus guy, but nothing that's going to be breaking the bank. It makes you take guys that are like your senior signing type of things in the later rounds. Committed to Oklahoma State. Good baseball program, but we see tons of guys commit to Oklahoma State. We see tons of guys commit to everywhere who end up signing in the draft. I think Doughty has one of the more high ceilings of any prep pitcher in this class. So I'm kind of infatuated with this next arm, and it's another LSU commit. His name is Boston Baitman, and the first thing you're going to notice about Boston Baitman is that he bats right and throws left-handed, which is just no, I'm kidding. Although that is still outside of Ricky Henderson, nobody should ever do it again. What are we doing, guys? Do not bat right-handed if you're left-handed. Come on. You're going to notice that he has incredible lettuce. What a wonderful set of hair on this dude. Oh, and by the way, he's 6'8", 240 pounds. He comes out of Camarillo High School in California. I mean, his size is massive. He is built like a small forward. And he is, like many big pitchers, for every Randy Johnson, you get a lot of guys who don't throw super hard. He's more in that 90 to 93 range. Now, I do think there is some, even for a 6'7", 240 guy, I think there is projection left. I think he will add ticks to his velocity. Could be up to 95, 97, I think, when all is said and done. And he's touched that at points. He just hasn't really done it on a consistent basis from the reports that I get. Has a plus curveball. Doesn't have that third pitch yet. So that's something to keep an eye on. But I think that with time, you can absolutely develop that. Repeats his delivery pretty well for someone that tall. Mid-rotation type arm. I'm just kind of infatuated with the profile. Like, the Mariners don't have guys like this. And again, we're not suggesting drafting a prep pitcher just for, you always draft best player available. In my humble estimation, that's what you should always do. The exception to that is the NFL, or if you're in the NHL and or NBA, I guess. But you don't do it in baseball. You don't do it in baseball is what I was trying to say. Just take the best player available, and Boston Baitman very well could be the best player available at 55. Just go look at the lettuce and go look at how tall he is. There's nothing not to like. Next up is a right-hander from Jersey. Jersey's produced some pretty good baseball players. There's one for the Angels that you may have heard of. I don't want to assume anything, but you may have heard of Michael Trout. He's okay. Bryce McAfee, he is out of the Pennington School in New Jersey. Not something I'm familiar with, but I am familiar that he's committed to Virginia. That is a school that produces a ton of good players, and if he ends up there, certainly someone to keep an eye on. 18, turned 18 in March, so we'll turn 19 at the end of March next year. That's how that works. 6'4", lots of projection in his arms. He's throwing in the mid 90s consistently, up to 95. Would imagine that can be a 95 to 98 mile per hour pitch as he gets stronger. Above average slider, probably could be a plus pitch. It's a hard slider, 85, 87, downward tilt, the type that the Seattle Mariners like. You know, they like those sweepers too, but Seattle Mariners really like their sliders. I think we all know that. We'll mix in a curve that's an average pitch as well, and we'll also show an average change. So full pitch mix. Control has some work to do. Like, there is definitely some mechanical stuff to clean up. That's true for a lot of prep arms. That's true for a lot of high school or prep and high school arms. That's true for a lot of college arms. That's true for a lot of MLB arms. Throwing strikes is not always that easy. There's some effort to his delivery as well. But I see the upside here, and I think Seattle's done really well with this type of profile. I think he would make a lot of sense at pick 55. Not as sexy as the other arms that we've talked about, but certainly an arm that would make sense in that range. And then finally, we're going to end with a guy who was originally in the 2025 class, but reclassified to 2024. And that's David Shields, a left-handed pitcher out of Mount Lebanon in Pennsylvania. Mariners have obviously attacked the Pennsylvania area before, and it looks like it's going to work out pretty well. Two-sport guy, extremely athletic. One of the more athletic deliveries that you will see on the mound. Still very much projection over what you're seeing right now, because he does not have an elite fastball or anything close to it right now. Looking at my notes, it looks like he gets 92, 94 more on a consistent basis. There was a time that was a well above average fastball. It ain't anymore, but I think that can absolutely develop into an above average pitch, maybe even plus, as he gets stronger and focuses more on baseball. He was a quarterback. Two-sport guys, sometimes it takes a little bit more time. Above average slider, solid change, and he throws everything for strikes. That's what's really impressive, is that he's so athletic. He doesn't turn 18 until the early portion of September. I love David Shields. I think that David Shields is one of the more underrated players in this class, committed to Miami. I think he's going to be a player they're going to be able to sign, just mainly because of the reclassification, right? Usually you don't see a guy reclassify and then go, nope, I'm going to college. It's not unheard of, but I would imagine that he's going to be a player that's signable, gets ranked more in that 50 to 55 range, but I disagree. I think he's a guy who I would consider with, like, if we're just going best player available, late first round. I just really believe in this guy's delivery and his athleticism and feel for pitching. There's just so much for me to like here. If you were going to ask me who of those five that I mentioned, Sloan would probably be at the top because there's just a little more upside, but David Shields would be number two for me. And don't get me wrong, I would take all five of those guys. All five of those guys I think would be awesome picks. And if for some reason the two guys I mentioned earlier, Cametti and Schmidt, were to fall to 55, yeah, I would be all over it as well. It would just mean that you are spending a ton on those first two picks, because I imagine that they're going to not go under slot with pick 15. So yeah, those are the prep arms that I think make sense. Really appreciate you guys subscribing and watching these videos. On Thursday, we'll go over the college hitters. I'm going to end with the high school hitters because I kind of have a feeling that we might see another prep bat taken by the Mariners in the first round. Not necessarily a lock, not even close to a lock, but it's just kind of a gut feeling I get talking to some folks. Really appreciate it. Please, leave questions, but don't go too crazy, because this is subscriber contact. And don't forget that if you're watching this on Monday, July 1st, tomorrow, July 2nd, we will do a live chat. We will be watching the game, talking about it, having a good old time. Cannot appreciate the support enough. Please suggest this to your friends or whatever. It really helps me. And yeah, thanks so much for watching. And draft's coming up.